some of the more tricky options that white can play in the opening. Notice I didn't say the strongest options. I said some of the more tricky ones. So after black plays g6 on move 5, the dragon. Now, after almost any move that white makes here, so far I think after every move that we've looked at, black has responded with the most natural bishop g7. I grouped these two lines that we're looking at today together because after both of these moves by white, the best move for black is not bishop to g7. So that should make it a little bit easier to remember. So the lines that we're going to look at today are the tricky Levenfish variation, f4, and a little bit more positional g3, with the idea to fianchetto the bishop. So when white plays f4, the Levenfish, the idea is to try to get in this move e5. So for black to respond with the natural bishop g7 is not in his best interest here. After bishop g7, white will play e5, and after the exchange, it's not easy here for black to place his knight. Knight to g4 would just be a blunder. After knight g4, white has a nearly winning position after the move bishop b5 check, to which black has no good response. If he moves his king, knight e6, the discovery check wins the queen.
Jesus.
If black blocks with the bishop, simply queen takes g4, exploiting the pin. And if knight to c6, well, white can simply take that as it's not adequately defended. So black can still get a playable position here with knight to d7, retreating his knight. But still after e6, I think the position is very good for white. Black's under a lot of pressure here. It's not possible to take on e6. Knight takes e6 looks crushing. So black can play maybe knight to e5. But after e takes f7, the black king is exposed, and white has a very comfortable position. So after white plays f4 on move 6, I think the best moves here for black involve developing his queenside knight. So either knight d7, knight bd7, or knight c6 are the best moves here. Both of them cover that important e5 square, which makes it hard for white to break with e5, which is his idea in this position. So for this video, I'm going to focus on the most natural, knight to c6. So after black plays knight c6, white usually trades, and then plays e5, which is his idea. But black can play his knight back to d7. Usually e takes d6, e takes d6. It's no problem here for black, as his bishop is defending the pawn. And I think this position is pretty comfortable for black. Black has a good center. He's going to have the open b file for his rook, which will be very strong. And I think he can still try to get his bishop on the good diagonal. After white goes bishop e3, the most natural move, here black plays bishop e7. He wouldn't want to play bishop g7 and let white capture that pawn on d6. So black goes bishop e7, preparing to castle. Very often white goes queen d2, black castles, and white castles queenside. However, as we talked about before in the dragon, it's very risky for white to be castled queenside when the b file is open for black's rook. Here at some point that rook is going to come to b8 and give white a lot of problems on the queenside. So black might continue here with d5, which takes space in the center and defends that pawn, so now the bishop is free to move to f6 and get on the diagonal. That's the strongest diagonal in this position. And black will continue with rook b8, with queen a5, and black should be able to produce a massive queenside attack in this position. Just to show you an example of an idea that black has sometimes, I'm not necessarily running through the optimal moves here, but say, maybe white makes, some natural developing moves, maybe bishop e2, black plays rook b8, maybe white starts to roll pawns on the king side. The point is that when black gets a position like this, black has a very powerful resource with the combination of the powerful rook on b8, the bishop along this great diagonal, and the queen in its active position on a5. So you can go ahead and pause your videos here if you're interested and try to find the winning continuation here for black.
Bishop takes, queen takes.
Black can play an excellent sacrifice here. Rook takes b2.
Oh.
Which undermines the unprotected knight on c3. So king takes on b2, queen b4 check, and after the king leaves, black will simply capture the knight with the bishop with a crushing position. Checkmate coming on b2. White will have to lose his queen here.
Right.
So the Levenfish, I don't feel like it's really a dangerous opening as long as you remember not to respond with bishop g7, but rather to play knight c6 in that position, and black should be doing just fine. The other move, after which black won't respond bishop g7, is where white plays g3. Now here, there's nothing inherently wrong with playing bishop g7, but the problem comes when after white fianchettos his bishop, here it's not possible to develop the knight to c6, which is where black would like to have the knight developed, because now white can trade the knights and then get a nice position after the central pawn move e5, which attacks the knight and pressures the c6 pawn. Here black would have to play probably knight to d5 and surrender a pawn, and white will have a good position.
Right.
So after g3, the best for black is to go ahead and play knight to c6 now. So now if white plays bishop g2, here black can simply exchange the knights, draw white's queen into d4, and play bishop g7, where black can simply continue by castling, and then after he plays bishop e6, black will be threatening knight d5 with the discovery on the queen, because the bishop on e6 is supporting the knight on d5, and that'll be a very nice discovery. Black can continue by taking on c3, wrecking white's queenside pawn structure and giving black a nice position.
Right.
So normally, after black plays knight to c6, white goes ahead and pulls that knight out of there with knight de2. Looks like a passive move, but white's setup is still very solid here. White's going to fianchetto, castle kingside, and just try to play the position after that. So I'm going to show a game in this line. It's a very nice game that was won by black by Mexican Grandmaster Manuel Leon Hoyos, who's a very strong Grandmaster. I've actually played a blitz match with Manuel before, and not only is he a very strong player, but also a very knowledgeable dragon player. I had a very interesting theoretical dragon match. So let's go ahead and look at the game. White was a very strong Spanish player, Antonio Torcelis Martinez, and black was Grandmaster Manuel Leon Hoyos. So the game started out with knight c6 and a little bit of a different move order, but you'll see that here it ends up transposing to the main position after g3. Here we're already back on main line. So white castles, and now Hoyos chose an interesting continuation, rook to b8, not yet developing the bishop on c8, I guess he's not sure yet whether the bishop wants to go to d7 or to e6. And this is a very important thing to remember. A lot of people have the mentality in the opening that it's development at all costs, that the pieces just have to get out to some square, and that's not necessarily true. And a lot of times it's better to play a non-developing move that has a plan rather than a mindless developing move. So rook b8, I think, has a very nice plan to try to play b5 and then b4 and to pressure white on the queen side, which is very typical in the Sicilian and in the Dragon. So rook b8, and white plays a4, preventing that idea. But black is persistent. He plays a6, and he's ready to play b5. White plays knight d5, bringing his knight to the center. And black actually retreats his knight back to d7. I think it's also okay here to trade the knights and to bring the knight into e5, or sometimes it can go to the c4 square later on. I think that's also fine. But knight d7 is an interesting idea. Actually, these ideas are seen a lot in the English, where white would get a position like this and then retreat his knight from f3 to d2. So that's kind of what black's going for in this position. And white plays c3, blunting the bishop along the diagonal. So now white's free to develop his dark square bishop without having to worry about his b2 pawn. Black plays b5, on with the plan. Takes. By taking, at least white is able to get an open a file for his rook. And white plays knight d4. Now both knights look very good in the center, but black's knights aren't bad either, and he jumps his knight into e5. Bishop g5, h6, kicking the bishop away. Bishop goes back to e3. And now finally black develops his bishop to d7, where it supports his knight, which will free the knight on e5 if it wants to go elsewhere. b3, controlling the important c4 square. I think black was planning to play knight c4 on the next move. And black plays e6 now, kicking the powerful white knight out of the center. Knight goes to f4. And queen c7, good developing move, connecting the rooks. And also I think this pawn on the c file is going to become a target. White plays h3. White is very persistent about trying to dominate this knight on e5 and keep it out of any possible good squares. b4, putting pressure on white's queen side. White responds with c4. But now knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, and rook a8, black challenges for the open a file. White plays knight e2, trying to find some direction for his knight. And bishop c6, improving the bishop and putting pressure on white's center. Queen to d2. Queen b7, further pressure on e4. The queen and bishop now form a nice battery. White plays f4. Knight back to d7. Looks like an undignified retreat, but the knight is actually planning to reposition itself to c5, which is a very good square. It's an outpost, and it puts pressure on white's weak point on b3. The base of that pawn chain is always a weakness. So white trades off the bishops, and queen takes d6, but black has a simple response. Bishop takes e4, bishop takes, queen takes, and he says, if you take my knight, I'll take your knight. Position should be close to equal, but I think black is a little bit better because white's king is a little bit more open. White has a lot of weak pawns here that black can try to focus on. White goes queen d4 check, swapping the queens. Knight f6, and queens trade, but black's knight is already very strong here. Rook to d1, and rook d8, challenging for both files. I think if white takes either rook here, black will capture white's rook on the first rank with check and have a lot of pressure. White goes king g2, getting his king off the back rank and preparing to activate his king. Black trades the rooks, and rook b1, pressuring the weakness on b3. Knight d4, and rook b2 check. Now as the king goes into f3, he's able to play knight d2 check, king e3, and finally to claim the b3 pawn. After a lot of hard work, black has finally achieved a much better position. White goes rook to b8, knight takes d4, king takes d4, and after king f6, black is simply up a solid pawn, and he went on to win this rook ending with masterful technique. We're not going to look at the rest of the game in the video, but please feel free to play through the rest of the game on your own for an instructive lesson on rook endgame technique. But the point of this game, the reason I wanted to show you, is because, after a lot of these non-Yugoslav attack systems, if white plays well, there's no way for black to, immediately get an incredible position. But just by having a good knowledge and understanding of the plans and playing, straightforward and strong chess, black is able to get a very comfortable position and to slowly grind white down. So I hope you enjoyed the game and look forward to seeing you in future videos. Thanks a lot.
Nope.